Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money. Money, money, money.
Welcome to the Free Money Podcast. It's where we bring you the Brooklyn Bay Area consensus about institutional investing you desperately crave.
Yes, you do. Welcome to Friday. I guess for us it's Friday. For everybody else it's Tuesday. Sorry, it's Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly. The Tuesday. Well, I mean, hopefully the fiscal crisis everywhere has been resolved by then, right?
I think we can hold out hope. No, it's 2021. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's really dire straits. Like I just searched fiscal crisis in Google News, and the stuff that I mean, it's like every state local newspaper has a thing about the fiscal crisis. New York City is facing the worst fiscal crisis since the 1970s. It's bleak.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, California, I think we're going to have like a 25 billion shortfall. And what a lot of people don't know about state governments, unlike federal governments, is they have a balanced budget rule.
Oh, yeah.
It means they actually have to find a way to fill that shortfall before the end of the budget year. And so that's going to be some serious pain for a lot of states.
Yeah. I mean, like one of the ways that they were looking at resolving it in New York, I mean, because we have a separate issue with the Metropolitan Transportation Authority that runs the subways, the bridges, and the tunnels, is just taking off the subsidy on the subway and on the tunnels, making it which would I think make the subway like $4.75 a fare up from $2.75. That wouldn't cause added pain at all.
No. And, talk about added incentive to get inside a subway with people coughing in the middle of COVID.
Oh, I literally haven't been back in the subway since March.
God, brutal.
I can't believe I'm saying that. But yeah, I mean, like, it reminds me, like, when I was at Oppenheimer, I had this colleague, Meredith Whitney, who issued this, like, what at the time was like this really ballsy proclamation. And she had just called Citigroup cutting its dividend. And so people were really listening to her. And she was like, 15 states are going to go bankrupt in the next year. This was like 2000.
It's a bold statement.
Yeah, I mean, especially because I'm not sure that we know how to have a state declare bankruptcy.
No, I think we talked about this one time already where we're like, I don't think you actually can go bankrupt. Like, I think you'd actually have to change the rules.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, there was a great back and forth between Cuomo, like the governor of New York, and Mitch McConnell, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, where he was like, "I dare you, change the law, let me go bankrupt. I dare you. I got your bankruptcy right here."
Seriously, and then they could dump the public pension liabilities on the PPGC.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
that would be a screw you to the federal government.
But like, honestly, what's kind of amazing to me about this is like every time I read Peter Orszag, who was Obama's budget director, wrote something, Meredith Whitney's case, we're all about pension liabilities grinding states out of economic relevance.
Totally.
And here we're actually talking about it. It's kind of maybe an eventuality that may happen to some states, and pensions had nothing to do with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what's amazing about this moment is this COVID crisis has just completely screwed over states.
Yeah,
we don't even know, because obviously, like, a lot of the unemployment that many of us are getting, states are paying for a big chunk of that.
Yeah,
and worse, we don't even quite know how bad the revenue situation is, because I think most states allowed us all to delay our filing.
Yep.
And so they're all sort of sitting there looking at way bigger numbers going out than they expected. And they don't quite know what's going to come back in terms of, tax revenue. And so it's a pretty precarious situation for states right now.
Yeah.
We see some serious, mega cuts. Or even some wacky bond issuance that gets them where they need to go.
Yeah, cue the what is that? The something or other theme song, Benny Hill theme song, right? In the muni bond markets. I mean, what's crazy is this is just the sort of thing that Ben Bernanke's famously written his dissertation about, right? Like the counter-cyclical, the need for a counter-cyclical investor in these economic downturns, because when the states get strained, right as like, the rest of us are all strained, they wind up exacerbating the existing downturn if they're not careful.
It's like greed. It's like the last thing you want to do when your economy is tanking is cut all spending. Like you want to actually to get the economy humming again by, freeing up some cash and getting people out and spending. If we're, cutting jobs and cutting projects and, doing all the sorts of stuff that you do when you have to balance your budget, it will truly exacerbate this crisis. Not that anybody realizes there's a crisis because financial markets continue to hit all-time highs, Sloan. But
yeah, I mean, no problem. As long as the Dow is at record highs, I don't care. Like who cares if a bunch of people starve?
Yeah.
Like, sorry, I just threw up in my mouth.
How do you really feel?
Well, no, it's this funny thing where we just don't acknowledge this reality that's right in front of us. And like, the last time in the, the big Great Depression, right? The one that we all refer to, not the Great Recession. We had like the Works Progress Administration that came out and basically just employed Americans to do all kinds of stuff, right? Basically pick up a shovel and do anything.
Yeah.
And like those wound up creating some like kind of in the vein of our conversation with Tom last week, right? Where you can't really predict the nature that innovation is going to take in the future. Like I was playing around with a Works Project Administration tool last weekend that was like a whole bunch of pictures of New York City in the 40s. And they just scraped it together with open data and made like an actually very cool thing out of it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It is interesting. One of the things, so not only is like, there are not a lot of jobs, and if states end up cutting jobs in order to meet these like, really difficult financial circumstances. But I also have a suspicion, because I am at a university, that there are a lot of students taking this year off looking for jobs.
Yeah.
You may actually end up with this like big influx of people that are taking a gap year or basically saying, look, I don't want to go do Zoom phone calls for a year. Like,
yeah.
By the way, any student that comes to me that's like, what should I do this year? I'm like, take a year off.
Yes.
Like, by the way, this is not official Stanford policy. but like, it sucks. Like, you don't have sports. You can't go to the basketball. Like, this sucks. And if you can like go do something that like boosts your CV a little bit, go do it. And so like those public works, like put Americans to work type projects, I could see a lot of young students wanting to go get involved with. But then I started thinking, oh wait, like we want to hire Americans right now that are, really need jobs, Yeah. So it's hard.
I mean, like I guess we just gotta, create a capacity to take as many of them and get them to do stuff, and pay them for it, like some kind of basic income thing. But I hadn't even thought about the ranks of college students joining the labor force suddenly.
Yeah. I can think of a few cases in the past week where people have sent me notes saying I'm taking the year off. Because if you believe we're going to get a vaccine, what did I think our dear leader at his big speech yesterday promised to have a vaccine before Election Day. So if you actually believe some of that, then why the heck would you go to college this year when you could delay it for a year and have a normal life? And I took a year off in college, and it was one of the greatest things I ever did.
I did too, and that's why I still work in finance. And arguably, it's not the greatest thing I ever did, but I definitely got a lot out of it.
Yeah. Well, I
worked as a stockbroker.
two discs in my lower back, so I was kind of obligated to take a year off. But it was. I remember I did like an internship at Bloomberg, and I was doing all kinds of stuff that year that really kind of helped me when I actually went to go get a job. So strange, such a strange existence right now. Everybody trying to navigate this like completely crazy situation.
Yeah, like I mean, we're kind of just jerks who are navel gazing, right? About this. Like, we're sitting here like, well, yes, this could be an issue for the labor market. I think yes.
Welcome to caviar, sweetie.
Yes, exactly. Any Grey Poupon? I think maybe let's call someone who might be a little bit closer to the action.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Who are the people who run finances at states?
They're treasurers, and shout out to treasurers of states.
A treasurer of a state.
We've been accused of being very New York and California centric. So, let's call the treasurer of Oregon.
Let's do it. Tobias Read is a good friend of mine. He's a brilliant treasurer. He's agreed to subject himself to our banter.
Yes.
Hi, guys.
Hey,
Treasurer Read. You got Ashby and Sloan from the Free Money Podcast. We're calling you quasi live. How are you today?
I'm worried about Ephanon, but I'm a believer.
Oh. Look, Ephanon. That's for another time. We don't want to. Although it's probably useful for our conspiracy theory to have a state treasurer legitimize Ephanon.
Well, I just need to know the secret handshakes and the symbol, all the symbols and the mythology and so on. But it seems like something we should really be worried about.
Yep.
Before we jump into the questions, and we have a few questions for you, Treasurer Read.
Yeah.
We want to, just check in on you and your family. Is everything okay there in Oregon? And
yes. What I've been saying to everybody is that there are two things that are simultaneously true. We feel very lucky that everyone is healthy and that the adults are employed. But at the same time, and I know you know about this, we have a 10, almost 11-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son. And so it's really hard. Both of these things are true. We are not alone in it by any stretch. But it's an hour by hour kind of thing with, we're both MBAs, my wife and I, but we're not educators. And so that's a challenge.
Yeah, it's super hard. I mean, I have to tell you just like a random story. I almost put my hand through the wall the other day when the internet went out because both my kids are on Zoom. We're doing remote school,
Yeah.
And so like I hear my kids like rustling upstairs, and I'm like, whoa! This is like the hour when they're occupied. Why is there so much rustling? And it was because the internet went out.
Our kids have an unerring ability to discern the 1 or 2 times a week when both Heidi and I have some significant call or Zoom meeting, and to pick that time to have the physical fight meltdown. And it's unbelievable how they figure it out. By the way, this is also, and I don't know quite as much about the Brooklyn seismic risk versus the Bay Area seismic risk, but in Oregon, I've been telling everybody this is just practice for the aftermath of the Cascadia subduction event that is coming. There's a 40% chance of a 9 or greater earthquake sometime in the next 50 years, and then we're going to look back with great nostalgia for that time we were quarantined with electricity and the internet and everything else. So this is just practice.
Wow.
Yes.
On that note, we were just how difficult the financial position is of states right now.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we wanted to jump in with you is all about, first, before we get into the pension fund or anything else, we're going to ask you a little bit about the budgets and how you're managing it. Sloan, why don't you jump in?
Yeah. So I was reading some local press in Oregon, and I saw that, reports that Oregon was facing like a $1 billion budget deficit this year. But I also saw, some stuff about a coalition of 5 Western states, which includes Oregon, requesting like $1 trillion, and California as well, requesting like $1 trillion in federal aid through this Western States Pact. And so it kind of, that order of magnitude difference kind of makes it hard to understand what's going on fiscally. Can you maybe set us straight a little bit?
Sure. Well, so the first thing is every treasurer in the country has a different set of responsibilities, and in Oregon, I've got it's a microscopic, almost invisible bully pulpit. But outside of that, I don't have a direct role over the state budget, so I can't speak to the specifics of that $1 trillion ask. But I do have, I feel like, a pretty decent understanding of how the budget works and why the support is critical for state and local governments. And here's what I know: Oregon, in particular, is way too reliant on the personal income tax. In fact, I think we are probably more. I think I've seen this somewhere in a legitimate academic analysis. We're more dependent on that source than any other state on any other single source. And of course, that means that we go up and down with the rest of the economic cycle. And that's what creates this projected $4 billion shortfall. And over the next several, that is, by the way, over about a $21 billion general fund budget over biennium, because we do this on a 2-year cycle. So if you add in that impact over the next 5 years, it's probably about $10 billion. And this comes in the context of an environment where we were just finally starting to make some significant improvements or investments in the K-12 funding. That's the biggest part of our budget. That's probably 3 decades after we started to see a property tax rebellion. We can thank you guys in California for that unwelcome export. That have, we're back in this place where this massive decline is hitting us right at the time, and at the wrong time. And it's, I think people forget how much the federal government and state and local governments are partners. We're delivering a lot of those things, and we are the ones that have to make sure that the social safety net is intact, but we don't have the ability to deficit spend or print our own money. So that, I think, is really what fits to the opportunity for states to band together. And I'd sure like to see Congress, the Senate in particular, doing their job, because, as you guys know better than I, when interest rates are this low, we can, at the risk of being a little bit crude, we can sort of say, debt schmet. We got immediate problems to fix.
This is a family
to keep it. What's that? Sorry.
Debt.
Yeah. So that's kind of the context, and the legislature and the governor have some really difficult choices right now, because we're in a better position in one sense that we have a decent amount of reserves socked away from the economic expansion, but politically, increased revenues are not that viable right now. So they have to choose between how much of reserves to use right now and how much to make cuts. And since we don't know the depth nor the duration of what we're in the middle of, to the extent legislators want to listen to me, I've been drawing on the experience of the school district where we live in the last recession. Understandably, they did everything they could to avoid cutting teachers and days. And when they got to the end, it was a cliff, not a glide path. And I've been saying to legislators, glide path beats cliff. So be thoughtful.
That's really interesting. I guess whenever you hear like budget shortfalls, I guess if you've got the disease that Ashby and I have, kind of what comes to mind is an opportunity for funding creativity, right?
Yeah, I have that disease too, I think. That's right. And you got to think creatively. You got to think long term. And lots of people said never waste a crisis, but we're in that spot.
Yeah. We were just talking right before about kind of the need for some sort of force to be an investor, and and I wonder, like, in terms of opportunities to raise funds. Like, I know that we're going to talk about ESG later, but you're an ESG issuer as well, and that seems like something that may give you some experience and maybe some opportunities to raise some funds. Like, how have those bonds been met in the market, and like, what have you been able to use the proceeds for?
They are really attractive. We've done 3 different issuances. In our case, all of them to support affordable housing in different forms. The last one, I think in June, was $95 million, 15-year taxable, what we call sustainability bonds. And I think they were 3 or 4 times oversubscribed. So that obviously has an impact and gives us the ability to get good terms and make sure that those dollars can go further. For us, it's been working really diligently to make sure that we're confident about what we're representing to lenders and developing the reputation. We're fortunate in Oregon to have a strong credit rating, and we want to protect that. And the chance to kind of expand that and take advantage of what I feel like people have associated with Oregon as a brand really gives us hope. But we're trying to take that carefully and cautiously so that we don't get ahead of ourselves. This affordable housing has been a good start, and I'm hoping that in years to come we'll be able to put those to other good uses as well.
That's interesting. I think shifting gears a little bit, Tobias, I want to talk to you about for a second the Oregon Public Employee Retirement Fund, which those of us in the know call OPERF.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some of the change, you guys have actually made changes as a result of COVID-19. I think I saw there was like a push to reduce some risk, add some fixed income, but also a talk around actually changing how you access opportunities, some shifting internally. Can you just talk a little bit in your capacity as being on the board there about how you've kind of made that fund more resilient with some changes after COVID-19 hit?
I'd be glad to, but let's set some expectations here. Let's admit that you two have surely forgotten more than I will ever know on the technical aspects of this.
We will be kind.
What I think I can add here is in the role as an elected person. I mean, I try to be the skeptical consumer of the technical experts that we're privileged to work with at Treasury. And represent the public in this space. So the thing that I think is to start with is the approach we're really trying to take in general, not specific to COVID, but to acknowledge that we have, as I know you guys have talked about regularly on the podcast, expectations and obligations that go out a long, long way, which gives us the chance to think differently than a lot of other investors. So we're never going to be, or at least we're trying never to be, the highest of the high in bull markets, and similarly, we don't want to be the lowest of the low in bear markets. So, 2018 and 2019 are good examples of this. In 2018, all in, we got 0.56%, and I say that to the public, they kind of get a sort of a gasp, and they say this will sound better when I remind you that California lost 3.5% in 2018, and they sort of look a little more mollified. And I say, but then think about 2019 when we got 13.6%, almost twice our assumed rate of 7.2, but that put us in like the 90th percentile of our peers. So we're going to try to get what we can, but limit that risk over time. Our former CIO had a nice analogy in explaining this and sort of making the point that there are different tools for different purposes. If I was going to go to the grocery, which we try only to do every 2 or 3 weeks these days, the electric car that sits in our driveway, the Ford Focus, which by the way I do not like very much at all, is perfectly appropriate. But if I'm going to go try to win the Indianapolis 500, I'm going to need a very different sort of car. So one way that we've we tried to take this on is to say, there are certain parts of the portfolio where we can hire people at much lower rates in Tigard, Oregon than we might have to in Manhattan. And there are other places where we need that expertise, those relationships and so on. And so we do have to buy the investment equivalent of the race car. So that attitude really flows into a bunch of different parts of the portfolio. We have, as you said, changed our attitude about fixed income. Really tried to emphasize lower risk approaches there. We've adjusted some of our allocations and targets, taking on a risk parity allocation, for example. For the first time, we've added a currency overlay, not in seeking returns, but as a risk management strategy. One other one that I think totally flew under the radar. We have a hybrid pension. So particularly for more recently hired people, there's a defined contribution portion of the pension. And until recently, that portion was invested completely the same as the defined benefit portion. So you had the hypothetical 28-year-old with the exact same exposure as the hypothetical 62-year-old. And I know I don't have to be very smart to say that's a bad idea. So there was a lot of behind the scenes maneuvering both on the implementation and on the politics. But we got that changed. So that defined contribution portion now slides into a suite of target date funds, which helps their individualized risk exposure, of course, but also insulates the fund as a whole from runs on the corpus, which could happen at the exact wrong time. So those are all elements, and we recognize that this is going to be an ongoing journey, and I really like the team that we have that's in place to keep us going in the right direction.
That also supports the long-term F&on deep state conspiracy to deliver good risk-adjusted returns to pensioners.
I like this part of the conspiracy. This is good. I can be on board with that.
And that leaders in the government are actually trying to solve the defined contribution governance problem. Nobody realized that, we all joke about how bad the pension fund governance is for DB plans. But then we forget that so many of the defined contribution plans are leaving people completely unprepared for retirement because they're not managing the risk to the stage of life that they're in. So kudos to you in Oregon for actually taking that on.
And it's not just public pensions too, because as we've talked about before, Oregon, and I'm flying our flag and saying this, we're the first state in the country to operate an opt-out IRA for people in the private sector who don't have it. We call it Oregon Saves, and we passed a law that says if you're an employer in Oregon who doesn't offer a retirement plan, you're now obligated to facilitate Oregon Saves. And so it means you say to your employees, unless you tell me otherwise, 5% is going into your IRA.
That's
and
awesome.
We've made that really simple too. So there's only 3 choices in this. You have a capital preservation option, obviously low interest, low returns. You have an S&P 500 index. That's the most risky we get. And then a suite of target date funds. And if you don't tell us anything else, you're going to put your first $1,000 in the capital preservation fund, and then everything else after that into the target date fund based on your age. You can adjust if you want to, but we've got now 3 years in, we got 72,000 people who have funded IRAs, an average balance of about $800 and a total of around $65 million, which goes up about $1 million a week. So we're on our way to helping people get there too, and that's proving to be really important in COVID times because it's a Roth, so they can use it as an emergency fund if they need to. Some people are, but the really best news about that is even when they're using it, they're staying in the program, so continuing to save.
That's so cool. That's, as a kid, that's rad.
Thanks.
Sounds. It's like, how would you design it? Basically, exactly how you just described it. 1,000 in preservation. That's your rainy day fund. Then the rest of it goes into appropriate risk return investments. So good job.
Yeah, I have no edits.
Audiences where I can actually quote a Nobel Prize winner in a sort of self-congratulatory way. But back in the days when there was a local financial press and we were rolling this program out, the Oregonian reporter called me and asked me about it, and I said, "Hey, this is Richard Thaler's idea that won him the Nobel Prize."
Yeah.
So he called Richard Thaler. This was at the time when we were taking we were doing our design, and Washington State went a slightly different direction where they just created a marketplace. Well, the marketplace we now know didn't really work because nobody did anything with it. But this reporter who was doing his job interviewed Thaler, and Thaler, I should have cut this out of the paper and framed it, but the quote, the money quote from Thaler was, "Oregon's approach is clearly superior." So I'm very, very proud of that. I have to find an old copy at the library or something.
Finally got one over those suckers in Washington State.
Yeah.
Hey.
But what's obviously shots fired at Washington, at California, and at the Ford Focus. But I can't wait till the lease runs out. You guys have to tell me what the next electric vehicle needs to be.
Yeah.
That's beyond my competence.
Why do you got a car? You told me you talked about this as the lease options, right? And the loan.
Yeah. It was. I mean, I am personally a subscriber to the buy a 15-year-old Toyota, family of car ownership. Yeah.
We're about to sort of net neutral because our electric vehicle is good, and then we have a gas hog car that has, because we have to have a third row for carting around in the before times when the carpools were possible. So on base, where the 15-year-old Volvo is probably in line with your Toyota.
Yep. Yeah. It's good to make sure that we compare, we're both indexed properly in the gas guzzling third row seat department. But I have an investing question for you. Which is I was Googling around and I was really surprised. Like I was reading a piece somewhere and somebody was like, the Yale model for private equity investing, which is basically invest a ton in private equity, works for all sorts of places. It can work for states too. Look at Oregon. Oregon is a notable success story in private equity investing. And I guess famously was one of the earlier investors in Kohlberg, Kravis, and Roberts, which is, now a behemoth. But I poked around your website a bit, and from what I saw, it looked like the fund is kind of paring back private equity exposure.
There's a couple wrinkles to that story. I think we are, proud of the fact that we were the first state to be into private equity, and that continues to pay us dividends in terms of the relationships we've had. But we're being, I think, smart about it, and we are paring back the overall expansion. Our target right now is 17.5%. We're a bit over that right now, but looking to draw that down over time. And I think that's really just a reflection of trying to take our foot off the gas a bit. But we've also been trying to make some other changes to the PE portfolio, which I think might even be potentially more significant. And that's in terms of how we want the relationships we want to have. So we've been trying to go fewer and deeper. And we've also got very proud of our one of our investment officers who's developed, I think, a pretty innovative way of saving money here in terms of co-investments. And we can talk about this because it was a big part of a public meeting several months ago. We're not so naive as to think we have special ability to pick the winners from the losers in co-investment opportunities. So what we've done is to say we're going to take a proportional exposure to all the co-investment opportunities and use that as a way to drive down fees and to better adjust our pacing challenges. We're a relatively big investor in this sense, and putting those dollars to work in the right at the right pace can be challenging depending on what our limited number of relationships, how they line up in terms of timing. So that's been exciting. And then we're in the early stages of figuring out how an emerging manager program would work for us. I'm hopeful that that's not going to be too far in the future. How we get that right in terms of the benefits of being exposed to investors that are earlier on. I mean, that emerging manager term, I know it's kind of loaded, but I like it for removing one of the barriers we've seen in terms of high check size. So I would love to turn this question around for a minute and ask you guys, if we're able to go down this path, what kind of questions do you think we should be asking as we think about what that looks like and how to be effective in it?
I'll start. Yeah, I mean, I think the term emerging manager is loaded with awesomeness. It's a license to innovate, and one of the things you guys have always been good at. You were one of the first to do evergreen. You did an evergreen private equity fund at one point. An emerging manager program can be incredibly powerful because it gives you an opportunity to go and partner with really early stage managers. And if you get the governance right and you get the funnel right, you should outperform, right? I mean, there's cases in particular in the great state of Illinois where these programs don't outperform because they aren't, great in terms of the governance and the oversight. I think you guys could do it and actually generate higher risk-adjusted returns because the evidence is clear and small private equity funds outperform big private equity funds. It's just hard to justify for pension funds the hiring and the resourcing to run small mandates.
Right.
But every single pension fund on earth is only investing in the behemoths. Well, where do the upstarts come along to challenge the status quo? And so, my desire is for all the public pension plans to build emerging manager programs, if only to challenge the status quo and keep the fees and costs down.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is what I think it gives us a chance to have those cost benefits. And what I've been asking all the time is how do we avoid missing out on that smart team that figured out something new, but
right.
we can't talk to them because they can't handle a $150 million check.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And, you may wind up I don't know, for some people, emerging manager winds up touching on diversity stuff.
That's what I meant by loaded as a term.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's I think what's really interesting about that is I think the overall cause of diversity has been weakened by people using diversity as sort of an ex post justification for those sorts of programs, i.e., we didn't deliver return, but look at all the diverse managers we backed.
Great point.
So I would it is fine to view diversity as a good in of itself, in my view. But I think I would be explicit about that from the get.
I think that's right. So it's an ancillary benefit. We're doing this because we want returns, and we'll also get exposure to a much more diverse cognitively and demographically and everything else set of managers.
Before the next question, I will say, I think the fact that we have a lot of bias in financial markets in which, people of color, women don't get the interest from the LPs that maybe is fair. And I did a research project on this.
Yep.
That you can actually negotiate better terms with diverse managers. And so in theory, you're capturing a mispricing and generating higher returns. And so those LPs that move aggressively into diverse managers may actually see outperformance if it is done well. And I actually can think of one city pension plan not far from me that is literally conceptualizing a part of their venture program that is about making money, but the thesis is women and minorities as an access point that is not sufficiently mature. And so that's where they're kind of allocating their capital. But the question I want to ask you, Tobias, is we're kind of taking more of your time than we promised.
This is lots of fun for me. So we'll go as long as you want. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. So one of the things that for me, the great missed connection, in the great Wikipedia, if you ever read those missed connections. Anyways, the great missed connection in Oregon was the moment when I thought the Oregon Investment Council was going to be spun out into a management corporation akin to the Canadian Crown corporations, which would have allowed you to resource the platform as if it was truly an asset management platform. And for me, somebody who's constantly fighting for more resources and public pension plans, it was this great moment all the way up until the legislature voted it down. And so my question for you, given you're an MBA and you kind of know how to properly resource organizations, are you still sending personalized hate mail to these legislators, or anonymous people delivery?
Well, it's a good question. First, I guess I would somewhat have to send them to myself because I was there. I was a legislator at that point. Yeah, and so I got to correct one piece of it. They never voted it down.
Oh,
they just never voted, which was the problem. I can recall. I served in the legislature for 10 years, and I was never more mad than when I sat there. It was in the last days of the session. I got the bill to the floor of the House, and I had the votes. And what I needed was a rule suspension to move it up for a vote in order to get there. And the House Republicans would not grant the rule suspension because they were mad about something else, and the Senate Republicans, and it was a whole thing. So we never got there.
Okay.
But But
It
the
seemed
important part,
reading it seemed like you got close.
we did, and I think there's a real silver lining in that, because that effort revealed the potential of that spin out, which is, as you just said, about having the resources and the independence and the autonomy. But the Oregon legislature is just not ready to go all the way there. And of course, we're all familiar with that insanity definition about doing the same thing again and again. So that ultimately, that was like I think the third try when we got that close. And so when I became treasurer, I said, I do not want to keep banging my head against that wall. And I sort of took advantage of that contrast, and went to the legislative leadership and said, look, there's a real need here and there's some real benefits. But if that piece, that having the public oversight in the form of the legislature is what you need, let's try to get the win and have a more productive relationship. And so we've got just about all of it in terms of the resources, the positions, that's there. We have to go back to the legislature and report in that way. And even if you think that's not as healthy or not as ideal as the Canadian model, we've been given the positions that we've asked for. We've been able to maintain our constitutional independence on IT and the back office functions and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not sending them anonymous pizza, but there's also not hate mail going back and forth. So maybe we get to share a pizza when we get back to that possibility in the after times.
Sounds very practical.
Oh man,
rising and doing the right thing.
It's a political answer, but it's true, because now we can do a lot of stuff that we weren't able to do before. There's one of our investment officers who said, we were emaciated, aspiring to skinny, and now we're kind of skinny on the staffing levels, but that's better than emaciated.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's something, right?
Right.
I want to also ask. I mean, like, it's funny. I was sitting with my girlfriend last night. We were watching your re-election commercials.
You've got to get a better plan for your next evening together.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely an angry at the movie choices constituency in the free money listenership. But it's funny, we watched the most recent one, which I want to ask you about, but it also left it on autoplay, and we've seen the change in the way that you're running, right? Like the first time you kind of like ran as a treasurer, and there was like there were all the kids smiling, and there was the school district and stuff. Whereas this time, like, your commercial is just sort of like, "Hi, I'm Tobias. I'm the treasurer. Have you guys heard about compound interest?"
Yeah,
it's awesome.
Yeah, which is
magic.
Yeah, which is highly rad. But is that like a relative call? Like, you're not as great as compound interest, or sort of an absolute call where you're sort of thinking, I am just not that great. I'll just change the subject. Well,
I guess it's some of both. Like, if there's, it's an acknowledgement that this is not about me. In a serious sort of way. Some other people have asked me, like, did you, you're just assuming that everyone knows you're great, and maybe that's it. I don't need to remind people. But joking aside, it's this is about an issue and an opportunity, and I'm privileged to hold the office, and I hope I can be reelected and keep doing it. But I'm not going to be treasurer forever, and if I can use the time I am able to be treasurer to drive that sort of interest, to use the word, that's better. We made that video before COVID, so we also have to acknowledge that things look really different now. But at the same time, that issue and the notion of thinking about the long run is always relevant. So whenever I get the chance to talk about financial security, whether it's Oregon Saves, or as that video talks about, the notion of saving for aspirations around education, I'm going to do it, and that gives me a better chance of achieving my own sort of measure of success. We're about to start thinking about what our commercial looks like, and our communications look like for the last 9.5 weeks of this campaign, and I don't know what it's going to be exactly yet, but I'm pretty confident we're going to try to talk about the reality that people are experiencing right now around financial anxiety and the ability to think about how interest can compound is a powerful thing.
Sure.
Yeah, really. And it's an important message to get out there. I mean, just very, very cool.
I remember when Treasurer Read sent me some of those, and I was thinking to myself, the amount of political advertisements that go out. Imagine if they were all public service style education announcements.
That would be so cool.
You actually had to say something of interest to people rather than just, imagine that was a requirement. You have to pick a topic, educate people, and then put your name at the end.
That's totally it. And when we talked about this, it was like, hey, we're going to spend money on this. Let's give somebody something of value. They don't particularly care who is the person that's going to be treasurer. I mean, frankly, when I'm doing campaign calls right now, I typically get the answer like, "We have a treasurer. You're on the ballot." So like, yes, but here's why it's important, and go to compound interest and help people get farther ahead. And it's also a really bipartisan, nonpartisan issue, because I can say to my most conservative Republican friends, listen, even if your only interest is in small government, you should like this, because more people saving their own money means they're going to need less help from taxpayers later on.
Absolutely.
And they can get down with that.
No, that's a bipartisan message, creating wealth and compounding. So, Treasurer Read, thank you so much for taking time.
Thank you.
Sharing the insights of what it is to be, managing a state's finances in the middle of a crisis. And we just really appreciate it. So thanks, and have a great weekend.
I have a lot of fun listening to the podcast. So thank you for doing it. It's been fun to promote what you're doing to a variety of other people. I talked to a city economist yesterday who was not aware of the Free Money podcast. He is now. So hopefully we'll be adding to the listenership too.
Yeah, and hopefully the F-anon faithful will speed you to a swift and early re-election.
Is there anything I should start saying in Zoom rooms that would send the message to the right people in the right way?
I think if you just try, the code is to use a lot of words that begin with the letter F. Just use it as often as you can.
That's dangerous, but I will do my best. Thank you.
Like Ford Focus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like Ford Focus.
Yeah, perfect. I'll talk a lot about the Ford Focus. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
I love it. That was a great interview.
Ford Focus, a car that Treasurer Read does not like at all. He was like, at all. He made the emphasis.
He's like, I absolutely hate it, but I support F-anon. It's actually, fun fact, my first car was a Ford Focus. Yeah.
I thought Ford Focuses were fun, zippy little cars. They even have these sport versions that the guys on Top Gear think are amazing. So
yeah, I had the little hatchback. He might have the electric with a little bit less zip.
His wasn't very zippy.
But I'm having so much fun imagining what Joe Biden's public service announcement commercial might be. I'm Joe Biden. Have you guys heard of the Amtrak? This thing is great.
Oh God.
Or Donald Trump's what's a federal agency he loves? Anyway. Oh man, it's time for Dear Ashby. This is Oh, we're doing it twice.
Thank you. I need it twice.
Yeah, double Dear Ashby. This is the segment where we take questions from listeners. And pretty please, if you're out there listening, send in a question. Write to freemoneypod@gmail.com. That's freemoneypod@gmail.com. And let us know what's on your mind. And while you're at it, why not also leave us a review on the iTunes store? That's all for the greater good.
If you liked,
right?
Yeah, if you liked what Treasurer Read had to say, give us the credit. You know what I mean? We got him on the show.
Yep. The trademark free money alignment, right?
Exactly. Alignment of interest here. If you like what our guests say, Get us a
Yep.
get us a five.
Yeah. It's all good things, all are doing. All bad things, not our fault.
It's very true. Very true.
Yeah. Well, here's a good question we got right in from a listener. The listener writes, I've interviewed at some public pensions over the years, and my impression has been that at least for like mid-career kind of non-CIO investment positions, that there's a huge preference for promoting from within. Just wondering if this is accurate and if it's another manifestation of like the whole organization-wide risk aversion thing that we talk about all the time. Sort of also wondering, like, what are the characteristics of plans that are more likely to hire from the outside?
Yeah, that's a really awesome question, in part because I feel like we should be demystifying the process to get a job at these plans. These are great jobs oftentimes, and you learn a lot, and you get to meet some incredible people in the process. So I have a suspicion that our question writer lives in America. Okay. We don't have only an American audience, but my guess is this person lives in America, because in America, getting a job at a pension fund is often like getting a job at the government. It's weird. You got to fill out weird forms. Are you in the union? Like it's strange questions. Whereas if this listener was maybe in Canada or in Australia, it would feel a lot more like a traditional finance job where the competencies brought to the table would be sufficient to get the job. In the US, it can be more difficult than that. And so like that's a big part of like when I talk to Treasurer Read about like properly resourcing pension funds, and like, that's about getting the hiring process right and like giving clarity to people who apply to jobs what the process is. Transparently inform people. What are you looking for? What are the standards? Too often I hear people say, I don't even know how to like get a job at a county pension plan. How do I go about doing that? Like, and if they ask me, I'm like, I think Pensions and Investments magazine has a list of jobs.
Like a job board.
Yeah. Like I don't even know how to tell you to look.
I mean, and we're working on getting a recruiter on as a guest in a future episode to help us demystify it so that we can demystify it for you.
Yeah. And I have to also admit, like, I get emails all the time from people in the industry that are like, oh, shoot, CalPERS has a CIO job. Like, how the hell do I even apply for that?
Yep.
Gotten a bunch of CVs this past week because Ben's leaving. And everybody's like, I don't even know how to apply, And so I think somehow this has to be a little bit simpler than what it appears to the outside world. Like, we need to work on that.
Yeah. Like one thing that's kind of crazy about this stuff is how much hiring tends to be predicated on like pedigree.
I know.
Like, which is just so, it's like inherently eugenics. It's literally eugenics. But
literally.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, more on that later. Stay tuned.
Yeah. Stay tuned for our next episode on eugenics.
Yeah, exactly. Or getting a job. We'll see. It's a grab bag. There's some contention over, is another question, over whether having operations in the West Bank, which is a contested region, claimed by both Israel and Palestine, is an ESG issue. And I'm curious what your take is on this.
Yeah, it's the type of question you could get yourself in trouble on.
Yeah, that's really an uncontroversial one, right?
Yeah, I had one of those last week I got a little bit worried about, but I'm not going to mention it again. Anyway, I think it should not be an ESG issue because I think local prosperity in these regions often will drive more international interest and a deepening of international relationships. And so where we have like international actors investing in West Bank or territories or wherever, I think there's probably more eyeballs on it, which forces people to be more either respectful or respect the rule of law or whatever. I think the worst thing you can do is completely ignore it. It's not quite the same as like the argument people make around like, oh, I'm invested in Exxon so I can vote my shares. I'm not trying to make that argument. It's a little bit different. It's like, first of all, we want to lift these people up out of poverty, and like they're living in poverty and they can't travel. We all seen seen what's going on. But at the same time, like getting international exposure and giving investors a stake, like a literal economic stake in the wealth of this region, in my mind, can't help but improve the overall situation. I don't want to legitimize any political activity that is, not necessarily legitimate, but I do think trying to raise these people up and give them a better life and paying attention to this zone in a way that isn't totally politicized will sort of open the door for more opportunity. That's my incredibly diplomatic response to a tough question.
It's a really tough. I mean, like, it's kind of an interesting meta issue, right? Like, remember when we did that thing on I think it was a while ago. There was this ETF that got issued that was like betting against the LGBT agenda.
That was right.
Remember that?
The God TF.
The Christian values ETF, right?
It literally was.
Yeah, and it's like
into the prospectus, we're like, we avoid the gay industries.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. All we do is just trucks and whatever.
Trucks and guns.
Yeah. It's like, well, sweetie, if you don't think truck stops are gay, I have something to tell you. But
the Dear Ashby music.
Oh yeah. Oh man, I don't have the horn handy. But like, no, like the it's because like I obviously don't think that's an ESG issue, but I guess in some ways ESG is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah. Social, right? It's social. And so people are thinking, there's a whole society in the West Bank that's getting, marginalized. And so should we be investing in that marginalization? And, this is one of the hardest things to figure out. So. Yeah.
And to your point that like just being there is good. I mean, like foreign corporations, when they show up, demonstrably improve conditions a lot of the time. Like all American corporations have to do, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act stuff. They're still subject to American law overseas.
That's right.
Anyway, last question of the day. This is I'm very excited about this one, as you know. The Federal Reserve has decided to allow inflation to go higher than the Fed's 2% target during a boom period, which effectively means rates are going to be lower for longer. Just forever, lower forever. Would that solve the student loan and debt crisis?
Let's take the first part, which to me is hilarious. It's like the whole point is inflation targeting. Like,
like that was the express point, but there's no inflation.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So that's great. So let's keep rates low. I mean, to me, this is like, how can we juice the stock market even more? Let's tell the stock market that even if inflation goes up, it doesn't have to worry. We're going to keep rates low, right? Because if like inflation ticked up, markets would get hammered because everybody would assume, oh, the Fed's going to lower rates. But so now the Fed has even preempted that by saying, hey, if you see inflation go up, don't worry. We're going to keep the taps on. You're going to have your party until the election, and then we'll figure it out. Yeah. So that's the first part, which I think is like almost blatantly political, even though people will tell me it's not political and that this is all just about economics. But to me, the
Federal Reserve is 100% independent. How dare you suggest we could be subject to political interference?
This was a Jackson Hole policy developed. It's like, come on. But then the neat thing is, a lot of loans are tied to interest rates. And like there was always this balance where, as inflation crept up, so did your borrowing costs, right? So there was always this notion that like heads you win, tails you lose when it came to your debts. But like the Fed, you nailed it in your question, or whoever it is. It's like, actually, if they're going to leave rates low in the face of inflation, you actually could get cheaper loans because the dollars you're sending in are worth less, but your borrowing costs are staying low. And so this person has astutely pointed out that, it's not going to resolve the crisis because I don't expect we're headed to 50% inflation. But
and that would create other crises.
$14 extra at the end of the year? Yeah, you might.
Yeah, I mean, well, hey, that's something, right? You know, $14 a pay period. Hell yeah.
Yeah. You can get an extra movie on, Comcast or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. You can give the monopolists immediately.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I guess that about does it for this week. And you know what? I guess because of the inflation at the end of this, I have a special treat for all of you out there in listener land. Ashby knows what's coming.
Yeah, hit it.
It is the Bank of Jamaica's song about stable, predictable inflation, which just dropped today.
Enjoy.
Have a great time. We love you. Bye.
Bye.
We don't want it too high. We don't want it too low. When inflation's stable and predictable, that's the way to go. Cause when it high, people are gonna cry. When it's too low, the economy can't grow. Economy marching to a new inflation beat. We have a brand new song for every street. Low lending rate, stability in place. Cause GOJ and BOJ run the race. The foundation well ready for private sector get busy. I said the foundation well ready for private sector get busy. We don't want it too high. We don't want it too low. No. When inflation stable and predictable, that's the way to go. Cause when it high, people are gonna cry. When it's too low, the economy can't grow.
This is a message from Bank of
We don't want it
Jamaica.
too high.